Hi, welcome to Comic Talk. I'm Josh,
I'm Drew.
and this is our new trade review of Ed Brubaker and Sean Phillips doing The Fade Out. This is just recently released as Volume 2. Issues 5 through 8 are in this trade. And although this review is about Volume 2, technically, we're going to talk about 1 through 8, the entire run so far, because it's pretty...
Because it's an Ed Brubaker story.
Yeah, it's all tightly compacted. You can't really just read Volume 2, but since it's new, we thought we'd talk about it and maybe convince you to go out and get Volume 1 while you're at it.
For sure. So, the obvious first big standout of this series is just the noir aspect. So I think we should talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I agree. This is quintessential noir. Even though it's not technically detectives, it's not detective noir.
Well, it
but
kind
it
of
is.
Yeah.
It's a detective story. They're doing detective work.
There is a mystery involved.
Mm-hmm.
There's a murder involved even. But the protagonists and really everybody around them, there's no police in the story whatsoever at this point. So it's just these two bumbling writers trying to figure out who killed this girl.
Right. So this is a story set in 1950s Hollywood, and these are two writers who have stumbled their way into the seedy underworld of Hollywood. And basically, what we get here is just a look at that underbelly of just depravity and alcoholism and just the terrible mob-run nature of that industry at that time.
For sure, just perverse in every sense of the word.
Mm-hmm. So both of our main protagonists, I would say we have one main protagonist, and that's Charlie. And then we have kind of what could be described maybe as his sidekick, Gil.
Mm-hmm. Who serves, interestingly, as a foil a lot of the time, but they do have a lot in common.
Yeah, they have a whole lot in common. They foil each other quite a bit. They sort of bumble along and get in each other's way. They both have the same goal here of trying to get to the bottom of what's happening, but they're such... their lives have sort of split to such a degree, and because of each other, they've forced each other into these very different paths.
Right, and so on that note, we should probably talk about the nature of their relationship because it's a very kind of interesting one. Essentially what we have is Charlie has a job writing movies. Gil doesn't. Gil has been blacklisted for being a communist, and he was basically a setup. You know, they just needed somebody to fall for it. But Charlie has writer's block since he came back from the war. I think it was Korea. I haven't checked. But he just can't put anything on paper. Like, everything that he tries to write just seems so stupid and insignificant, and he can't get over it. So Gil just writes the movies for him, and then Charlie's the face for all that.
Mm-hmm. And so they both together, they stumble into this murder mystery full of, like we said, depravity and pedophilia and just kind of shitty people. But because of their relationship and how Charlie is the face of this group, he has to deal with all these superstars and directors and all of the people within the Hollywood community. His approach to trying to figure out what's going on is starkly different from Gil's approach. So what this sets up is this interesting dynamic where we get this murder mystery and we see two completely different ways of going about trying to solve the same crime. And we also see how these two people going at it these different ways kind of stumble upon each other or stumble each other up because they have different ways of going about things, and one's methods will screw up the other's methods over and over. Like through this whole series, it's
a recurring theme.
Right, they're just getting in each other's way just because of the fact that they have two completely different perspectives on this. And it makes for a really awesome detective story. It helps to break it away from your normal dynamic of the lone detective, slinking his way through through the story.
Yeah.
And neither of these guys are like that. They're both
No, they're not cool.
they're not cool. Charlie's bumbling and Gil is, well, they're both drunks.
Yeah.
They
Gil's
spend-
probably more of a mess in every sense of the word, but that's not to say that Charlie's not a mess.
Right. They both spend at least 2/3 of every issue drunk and
Getting in bar fights and just
puking in alleys, and a lot of the problem of the mystery is that they spend so much time blackout drunk that they don't remember a lot of the things that would solve the crime.
yeah. That's one of the big plot points, actually.
It recurs over and over again, and the main plot point is actually that he was blackout drunk and doesn't remember who was around when this thing occurred.
Which kind of brings me on to my next point of hyperbolic humans. That was a good way to put it. These people that are just such drama queens and all that, characters within themselves, that it's crazy. It's again, we're in 50s Hollywood, so we get a lot of clips from movies and stuff like that, intertwined within the panels. But the characters themselves just want to be those movie characters so bad.
Right. And a lot of what drives this forward is all the self-absorption of these characters and how busy they are with themselves.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times they miss what's happening with everyone else around them, and it's part of what allows a lot of the mysteries that are driving forward to happen in this story. Is that
just how selfish everybody is.
Everybody's so selfish. They have their own goals and they pay no attention to what anyone else is doing, and they don't seem to care when they trample all over each other either.
Mm-hmm. That one guy just goes out and gets in a car wreck and stuff like that, and is upset because nobody's. I think one girl came to see him and he's like, nobody cares, blah blah blah, and yeah, everybody's just doing their own thing and having comparable disasters at the same time.
Right. Yeah. It's just everyone in this book has their own disaster that's occurring. It's tightly woven, and I'm hearing that this is going to be 12 issues, so there'll be a third trade.
Mm-hmm.
And there's one issue of the last trade out. So technically there's 9 total so far. And I think this is going to have to come to a incredible catastrophe of an ending where everything just crashes down. And so far up to this point, it's just incredible in 8 issues how much stuff happens.
Mm-hmm.
It's
in a character-driven story at that.
Right.
This isn't a Cape book by any means, and it's not even one of Brubaker's more espionage, spy, gangster sort of oriented stories at all. It's just all these people, and they're just such a disaster within themselves that so much story occurs. It's insane.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's almost no action. Where there is, it's simply to drive the character growth forward. Mm-hmm. We have our main antagonist, I would say, that causes a lot of the small action or the direct confrontations. That's the security.
Right.
And this guy, I think he deserves a little bit of recognition how he's being written in here. Because at first he comes off as a bit of a nebulous figure. He seems like the kind of guy that could be a problem. But as we get into this second trade, we really see him blossom into a real dirtbag.
Yeah.
Really.
Yeah.
But it's not the antagonist here, and he's not the big antagonist, but he's the face of the antagonism.
Sure.
With him, we get a lot of character growth there as well, which I really like, that we're getting this growth from the muscle. He's the guy with the fists that does all the cleanup.
Enforcer,
Right,
He's
but
usually the nameless figure.
Right. But even this character becomes an important figure in all this because
and he has big bits of exposition and stuff where he'll just talk about his views on life or interacting with people or something like that, something that's usually given to big main characters. And yeah, it's awesome to see somebody who would normally be a side character be brought in like that.
Right. And it makes sense from this gritty realism that Brubaker's trying to do here, to give this character some meat to him, because this is a person who, in these people's lives and the way he's interacting with them, he's an important figure to them. So a character that could very easily, and most writers would, just slip him in and out. A character that I think of in Sin City, we have the two enforcer characters who are really just done as almost a comedic relief.
Yeah.
They show up, they beat some people around, they make some jokes, and they drive away, and that's all you get from them. But they feel like similar characters, or that they're coming from a similar place in the pantheon of characters that you would use for this sort of story. But with Brubaker, we get this opposite approach where we really dig down into that character. I think it says a lot about how this book is written as a whole, that we would approach that character in that way.
Yeah. And there really aren't a lot of side characters, so to speak, on that note. And even people that you think are going to be a lot of them have been brought back later for more exposition and stuff like that. And so you really get a good idea of who they are, too. So.
And he has this interesting thing that he does at the beginning of each, where we get the cast of characters on the first page, that tells us exactly who everybody that's going to be in the issue and has like a speaking part, who they are and what their relationship is to everyone else.
Right, what role they play.
Which I think is a really clever tactic, because there is a large cast of characters. There's probably 10 to 15 people you have to keep track of in this murder mystery. But he pares it down each issue and gives you between 5 to 8 people and makes sure you know who they are and what they do before you get into it, which really helps pull you back in each time if you're not reading this in just one chunk or immediately.
For sure. Another cool thing that's at the back of the book is everyone has like a big write-up on like a big actor from back then that he's somehow worked into the story in some manner, which I think is kind of cool. It's like he's working in bits of like 50s Hollywood continuity into his stories. It's an interesting approach.
Yeah, and those are written almost as like Hollywood extra exposés on these people.
Yeah, it really gets into the dirty stuff on them.
And I'll have to admit that I haven't read through all those.
Yeah, I've read a few of them.
Right, I skimmed through them. I looked at a couple of them, read through one or two of them. Mostly I just skip it, but for certain people I think there's a lot to add there.
Yeah, and it's also cool because, again, giving you basically the dirt sheet on these people really adds, I think, a sense of like legitimacy to the story. Like all of the things that he's portraying, like, this is probably actually what it was like, and just because there aren't that many portrayals of it being like that doesn't mean that that's not what it was. So again, for him to take, 50s, like technically perfect families and the American dream and stuff like that and paint it into this dirty, grimy kind of thing, around the people that were portraying that American dream, it's cool.
Lastly, before we come around and talk just a little bit about the artwork before we get out of here, because it does deserve some discussion, we should probably also talk about those noir aspects and sort of the lyrical nature of how it's written, because it is written in somewhat of a noir style where I think I've described this sort of noir in the past as being written as if everyone is just a few steps cooler than they really are or they really would be in reality. Everyone just has their prose together or how they approach their sentence structure, which is fun with a good writer because we get a chance to see Brubaker play with the English language a little bit and play with how he structures his sentences. Maybe not to the degree of maybe an Alan Moore type of writing, but we're approaching that level, that lyricalness here.
I don't think it would necessarily be appropriate to do the Alan Moore thing in this book anyway, though, because everybody's also trying to seem like tough and somewhat dirty and from the streets in the 1950s way, whatever that would be. So you're not going to get big, wordy, like question-like monologues from these people. But that's almost cool in itself because you're playing with a completely unique vernacular and being clever within the constraints of that vernacular.
Yeah, and what's interesting here is the central conceit of the book, with them being writers of 1950s film, which everyone, well, at least I do. When I think of 1950s film, I think of that noir, transatlantic type of dialogue.
Humphrey Bogart and shit, yeah.
Right, and because our two leads here are writers who write films for Hollywood in the 50s, it gives us a really natural in where it doesn't feel the way noir usually feels, where it feels playful and it doesn't feel real. But this manages, not just because of the tone being so, I hate to use the word gritty, but this is one of those times where I feel like it's an actually appropriate term for a book, whereas usually when people are saying gritty, they're talking about Batman or something, and it's not really gritty. Batman doesn't go on benders, but
Yeah, there's a couple scenes with a trash can and somebody's bleeding. It's like, oh,
right. Oh,
it's
there's
real.
You see that? There's trash in the alley. But here we see people puking and fucking in the kitchen. It's
Yeah,
so it's much more grounded in that dark, dirty reality of human existence. But because these guys are writers and they spend their days trying to create dialogue that sounds this way, it becomes completely reasonable. And actors who are constantly speaking these lines and using this sort of transatlantic dialogue, it feels completely natural that in the comic itself we get this type of dialogue, because these are, if anybody in the world was going to speak like this,
Right.
these are the exact people who would speak this way.
for sure. So artwork-wise, detail-wise, it's not anything to necessarily write home about, but I think it definitely has some very cool qualities. One of the things that always catches my attention is just the correlation between the mood of the page and or panel and the coloring that's done on it. It's like mood is the number one deciding factor of coloring on the page, it seems, and I think that's very, very cool.
Yeah, I definitely agree there. There's something to be said as well about the simplicity of how this is done. The paneling here is nothing tricky. There's no clever flourishes. We get very simple, old school layouts, just box to box to box down the page.
Not even like a 2-page spread.
There's nothing. I don't even know if there's a single 1-page spread in this whole book.
I'd have to check. It's probably a standalone one if it is.
There's very few. Most things are in those old school grids, 6, 8, 9 panel grids. But for this book and the way this storytelling works, it's completely appropriate, and it would not have worked as well without this artistic choice to really pull back and do a very old school paneling style of work here. We don't
It
even
also kind of reminds you of like the film, doesn't it? When just like these little boxes. Yeah, exactly.
Right, yeah, definitely. And we don't even get like circular panels or strangely shaped panels. This is all 4-sided squares, rectangles. And then, like you said, the detail within the panels themselves isn't even that high. It really allows you to focus on, like you said, the mood and the impact of the dialogue, what's being discussed. This is very writer-driven. And the artist should be credited for not hogging the page in a way that could have taken away from
trying
the
to overdo
importance.
it and completely change the feel of something just to, add a couple lines here or there. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
It's cool to see people pull back sometimes and really just try to objectively supplement the story. It's like the the 4-note guitar solo that's just really good.
Right.
And then, you know, there's also like the 600-note one that's terrible.
Right. And the other part of this is the actual framing of the panels is fantastic. The way he uses the panels to frame the scene.
Perspective on everything is just perfect.
Yeah,
Always.
yeah. You always feel like you're in the thick of it. You're right there with it. You feel down in the alley with him. You feel like you're in the bar at the table. He does this. It's almost the feeling of the documentary style shooting. It's almost the comic book equivalent of that, where you feel like you're down in there as somebody witnessing this firsthand, rather than these more dramatic shots that a lot of guys do that go right along with the funky panels and the interesting framework. Here we just get everything's usually at eye level, or even, you know, if you're sitting
like
down,
a movie. Like,
you know, if people are standing around a table, you're going to be at the level of someone sitting at the table looking at them. It's shot like an old 50s film where you're almost a character within the scene.
Yeah.
So on that aspect, it's great. But also the way he draws his characters, although they're not extremely detailed, you always get a very clear sense of their emotional impact.
Even looking at them, I mean, the assumptions you make about them almost always supplement who they actually are.
Mm-hmm.
Like, whether you're right or wrong about them, like, that's the point.
Mm-hmm.
Like, Charlie looks like this very clean-cut guy, and then just through, like, seeing his actions and stuff like that. I mean, originally going into it, like, I thought he was a lot, I guess, cleaner. I don't want to say it, but then he was, you know, just because of kind of the way he carried himself, and, you know, he had glasses and the short hair and everything, but then just through seeing his actions, you know, you start to understand that he's really not, and that's part of the story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's a lot of posturing in this, with people presenting themselves in one way, and then when they think people aren't looking, they become somebody else in a way.
Mm-hmm.
And that's incredibly well illustrated here. You get to see both sides of everybody. Charlie's a great example of that, because when he's on set, and when you first meet him early in the trade, like you said, he seems like a stand-up guy. Military pass, standing straight, and
Right.
very clean hair, nicely kept together. But then as we pull at the threads, we see him in these other situations, and you get a complete 180 of this character, illustrated-wise. He's crumpled and tired, and everything down to his glasses being crooked and, you know, worn down, and his hair's mussed, and you can just see it in his eyes and the way he's illustrated. And you get this with all the characters. It's not just him, but he's just the one I'm talking about. We get this with everybody. We get these different angles.
Gil, to some degree, you know, I mean, you start out thinking that he's like just the absolute worst, and Charlie can do way better than him, but then you start to like Gil.
Right. And not just from a writing perspective either. From artistically, you see him at times stand up and get a backbone and stand up to people, and you could pull the writing out of it and just show the sequence in the panels, and you'd get that same effect. You'd think, oh, this guy isn't so bad after all. Maybe he can get his shit together and do something worthwhile from time to time.
Right. Of course he hasn't yet, but that's fine.
Occasionally he does. You know, he stands up and punches somebody, or follows a lead, that sort of thing.
For sure.
Yeah, so I think the verdict here is...
Read it.
You should definitely read this one, especially if you're a fan of Brubaker and
Which
Sean
who
Phillips'
isn't?
work. I'm sure there's people out there.
I think they probably just haven't read him. I don't think you can read Brubaker and not be a fan.
Maybe. Yeah, but especially if you're a fan of detective novels, if you like the time frame, if anything that we've talked about sounds at all interesting, you're going to be in on this when you actually take a look at it, because it's fantastic.
I mean, a lot of people like Mad Men. This is like better, in my opinion. It's a better version of that.
Yeah, Boardwalk Empire, any of these period dramas from the first half of the century, if you're into any of that kind of stuff, you're going to fall in love with this when you read it.
Downton Abbey. Yeah. No, that's not.
I don't think that's... You definitely want to check this one out. I say read it no matter what. I can't imagine a whole lot of people who are not going to enjoy this, and I know that that's how you feel about it.
Yeah. And if you don't enjoy it, then I probably wouldn't enjoy you as a person.
Then you suck,
so
and
you're terrible.
unsubscribe.
Please.
We don't even want you here. Beyond that, as always, you probably should actually subscribe, like, and all that kind of things. Give us some comments on what you thought about this series, and if there's anything else out there like this that you think we should read. We always love to hear that sort of thing. Facebook and Twitter and all that kind of stuff. You know the drill with all that, I'm sure, by now. Beyond that, on Monday, we are going to be talking about Gotham Central. That's coming up for the new Gotham season is out.
It's going to be super tight.
Yeah. So we're looking at Gotham Central, which is sort of the closest comic book equivalent to that show. So we wanted to go back and look at that, and it's Greg Rucka, so come on, right?
Yeah.
So we're going to talk about that one, the first trade for that on Monday. And then, of course, next Wednesday, we'll have our pull list review for the week. We'll talk about what we liked and didn't like from that week of comics. So check us out. Thanks.
Later.